The Archaeology of Death and Memory with Professor Howard Williams. It's Archaeodeath.
Archaeodeathlings, it's Archaeology Professor Howard Williams here with a presentation on the archaeology of the Acolyte from 2024, High Republic Archaeologies. Now this was a paper I gave to the archaeology group of the Flintshire U3A as part of a series of reflections I've been producing for my social media on archaeology in and of the Star Wars universe. So let's get into this and give you a sketch of the ideas I've been coming up with and identifying and evaluating that you can also find in my in a blog form on my WordPress Archaeodeath blog. So here's my blog if you want to follow this up and read more about what I'm going to address in this discussion. All about the different planets and some of the material culture of the Acolyte. So for me, this is a particularly interesting modern pop culture science fiction representation of a world building scenario that builds off what we already identify in a well-established media since the 1970s of the Star Wars universe. But this is the first live action prequel to the prequels, taking us back to the world of the High Republic. Now, I recognise that the TV show received mixed responses and was criticised in many regards, but I thought this was a compelling, interesting, different and particularly archaeological series of 8 episodes in which we're taken back over 100 years before the action of the Skywalker saga. And before we get into the show itself and the themes, we have to think about what is archaeology in this context. So I think the first point is that archaeology is the study and preservation of material remains of past societies and their environments, and to do that we have to understand and explain those past societies for other specialists and broader audiences, and that we have to engage and educate people today about paths and places to foster the study and understanding of our discipline and the need to understand the past to inform the present and the future. But to do this, we have to understand archaeology's place in contemporary society, the many ways it interacts with our contemporary world. And part of this is investigating archaeology in and of the genre of science fiction, in which archaeological themes are varied and prolific. But also, I have to say, since archaeology also extends to outer space with space archaeology and into the contemporary, not simply in the ancient past, through contemporary archaeology, those are logical reasons in itself to justify an archaeology of the Star Wars universe and the Acolyte specifically. And given that Star Wars is such a popular franchise globally, with TV series and spinning off from the books and films and video games, we have an enriched, complex material cultures, built environments and landscapes from a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away that people care about. Indeed, there are many more ways to engage people in the Star Wars universe than perhaps and people feel more invested and confident in approaching this kind of fictional universe than perhaps they do for any single period of the human past. So archaeologists can use this as a gateway drug, if you like, into education and research, but also study it in its own right as a phenomenon of our popular culture in which archaeology informs the show. It is about world building in which material culture, built landscapes and architecture are important, and in which archaeological objects can have specific connotations. Old things can have power and meaning within the storyline. So there's a range of archaeologists that have already addressed the issue of an archaeology of Star Wars. And here's a montage of some of them. And I would say that we've seen reflections on the film sets and material cultures in our world that were settings for these fictional spaces. The way that archaeologists and antiquarians appear in the show, not as adventurers, detectives and revelators. Now, there's very few archaeologists in the show itself, although there are at least one. But in addition to the representation of archaeologists, there are antiquarians, people who dabble in the past, interpret law and decode mysteries and reveal secrets through adventuring, detection work, and revealing secrets. So we see that in particularly the show Ahsoka. And archaeological inspirations have directly informed the representation of these fictional worlds across a fictional galaxy. And prehistoric, ancient, medieval and modern eras appear immersive, integral to the immersive world building, so giving that sense of that aura of pastness, as well as specific allusions to particular ideas from our human story that inform our understanding of these worlds. There's also archaeological and heritage themes and issues, particularly the tension between colonialism of large-scale complex societies, their religious systems, their ideologies, their politics, and indigeneity, individual cultures, planets, and their relationship to these broader forces and structures of imperialism, colonialism, and nationalism. And so there's that sense also of a key theme in the Star Wars universe is a sense of a deep, fragmented archaeological history of change, of collapse, of rises and falls of civilization, and only a sort of the people who inhabit these worlds seem to have only a dim understanding of that story, its time, depth and complexity. And as I said, in many of these stories, material cultures, architectures and landscapes have a specific set of connotations in driving forward the story, and sometimes ruinous old things, relics, have a sort of power in this gritty futuristic world, that they have spiritual significance, they hold stories, they have lessons to tell the different antagonists and protagonists. And so in my own blogs, I've already addressed an archaeology of the Star Wars universe through looking at the power of Darth Vader's mask, almost a relic of his cremation as well as his life, as a sort of quasi holy relic for Kylo Ren in The Force Awakens. Then we have the films that show various fictional worlds, as well as my own blogs that have addressed the Mandalorian, the Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka, the sort of post-imperial world of fragmented outer rim societies trying to pick up the pieces following the Galactic Empire's demise, but also during the Galactic Empire, the Archaeology of Andor Season 1 with its many material cultures, but also specifically memorial dimensions. So these are the things you can read up about before, but I haven't previously written until the blog I've just posted about the Acolyte, where we see not only a series of characters over 150 years ago in the backstory, and then about 110 years before the rise of the Empire in the contemporary story, a range of different planets experienced in parts of the galaxy. We see a younger, a less expansive republic than at its very end. There is an outer rim, an exploration frontier zone, but there are also planets at the very heart and core. So this is the list of planets that we get to see: Ueda, Coruscant, Karlak, Olega, Kofar, Brendok, of course, and then the unnamed unknown planet. The plot is obviously a complex one involving flashbacks in two key moments, but it's about the Jedi as the sanctioned official force users of the galaxy, a quasi-religious order who have temples and who defend and maintain the peace and are stationed across the galaxy in different scenarios and roles, going on missions to gather intelligence and to try and understand any threats to the fragile Republic. There are reports arrive that Jedis are being murdered, first Master Indara, then Master Torbin and Master Kalnaka, and Master Sol and his apprentice and his former apprentice are among those that go and investigate what's going on. So Sol is sent to investigate the first killing. An assassin is revealed as one Mayho Anasea, the identical twin of a former Jedi Varosha Anasea, and she is seeking revenge under the tutelage of a Sith Lord who uses a mask to hide his face and thoughts from the Jedi. We learn that he's called the Stranger, although in disguise with his face revealed he's known as Khmer. Now, Mayho is seeking revenge for the slaying of her mothers, plural, and their coven of Force witches, who called the Force by the name of the Thread, and they had lived on the planet Brendok, where some 16 years ago the 4 Jedis had gone on a mission of investigating how, following a hyperdrive disaster, a warp disaster, there had been a destruction of the planet, but that life has miraculously come back, and they reveal that there's a vergence of the Force on the planet, which the Force witches are tapping into, and have created these twins, who are not twins, they're actually clones of each other, and are sort of particularly sensitive in the Force, have particular powers, and their idea is to sort of develop their coven, but in fact what happens is the Jedi screw it up, there's a fight, the twins are thought to have died, well, one of the twins is thought to have died, and Master Sol sort of basically abducts Osha and inducts her into an apprenticeship with the Jedi that she then rejects. So the backstory then takes us back to these multiple perspectives on what happened on Brendok when the 4 Jedi, Indara, Torbin, Kelnaku and Sol, encounter the coven led by the Mother Anasaia, who are on this otherwise abandoned planet, which the Jedi thought was abandoned, and they encounter at this vergence of the Force, a concentration of Force energy, this coven practicing, and it all leads to violence. So the plot twist is revealed of who is responsible for the killing of the coven and the fates of the twins. One who's thought dead but ends up seeking revenge as an assassin, trained by the dark side, and one who is a former Jedi who works as a mechanic, eking out a living in a corporate sector on the edge of the galaxy. So the first archaeological theme to address is the fact that this is filming locations. Now, the island of Madeira, a Portuguese island in the Atlantic, a volcanic island, is used for dramatic scenes on Kofar and the unknown planet, the planet where the Sith Lord trains Mayho, and then later we find tries to train Osha. And that's really interesting, and we see agricultural terraces there that are part of the historic use of that landscape. But in terms of real, striking archaeology, it's Banan Preceniog in Cymru that is used, the Taf Fechan Upper Newarth Reservoir and Dam, as well as the Taf Fechan Forest. The reservoir is used as this neo quasi medieval aesthetic as the filming location for the Citadel, which was a former mining operation that is now used by the Coven of Witches in the sort of backstory. So we have the Wales becomes Brendok, this planet that has a power, a force, a spiritual essence to it, and the beautiful upland landscapes of Wales then get translated over to this sort of magical land where no one lives, allegedly, but no sentient beings exist apart from this coven of Force witches who have come to the planet and are extracting and exploiting the Force energy. We have science fiction landscapes, architects, costumes and material cultures are all inspired by archaeology in different ways. The overall aesthetic is to show a little bit of a vintage aesthetic, because we're used to a much later time, 100 years in the future, so everything's made a little bit more retro, so it has almost a mid to early 20th century aura about things. I can't quite pin that down, but in terms of colour choices, palettes, and in terms of style, there's a sort of sense of retro, but only if you're utterly immersed within what we've seen in the Star Wars universe so far. So there is a careful set of choices of the design of droids, the design of computers, and the designs of clothing to give that sense of a different time, a time before. And that's an important aspect too, and is rendered when we go to the heart of the galaxy, to the planet city of Coruscant, where we see a almost identical, as far as I can tell, Jedi temple. So this idea of a timeless connection to later times, which when we're going to encounter the Jedi, operating in almost a comparable space with slightly different costumes, but around it a much less developed Coruscant. So you get this sense of, yes, it's a vast and incomprehensibly complex and advanced planet where there's no single bare section of the original planet's surface. It's all covered by human construction, human architecture. It's utterly futuristic, and yet there's not as many towers, there's not as much built up around the Jedi Temple. So the Jedi Temple seems to be surrounded by an earlier city planet, and I think that is a key sort of indicator that we're dealing with an earlier time that's absolutely and specifically constructed for this earlier time. But the idea of the wider universe being absolutely ram-packed full of planets with different cultures at different stages of development, but also with deep histories, is revealed from the get-go, with the Eastern Asian, the Orientalist vibe aesthetic of Ueda, which is a planet we're told is a trading colony. But it has ruined pillars of what may be a bridge. There's a sense of decay and antiquity, as well as a noodle bar that sort of gives that sense of almost like a medieval or early modern tavern that we see so often in Chinese and Korean film adaptations for Western audiences. So you get a sense of antiquity in itself, and a place of cosmopolitan interaction, a trading post, but also a sense of a deeper relic past. Alega is also shown as a former citadel frontier site, where you see patina on the walls, a sense of dirty streets, and a Jedi temple that looks old and worn and integrated into a deep, dense topography. It very much could be a medieval or early modern city, or a modern inheritance of such a dense and busy urban environment, rather than a planned, organised, futuristic space. So that sense of the past as embedded in these planets is clear for all to see. Now, as well as those built-up cosmopolitan trading hubs linked to an expanding republic and their Jedi, we also get wildernesses, wild places away from sentient life, the mysterious unknown planet with a dark Plagueis lurking in a cave, watching over the stranger try to create acolytes of his own. We also have the ice planet of Karlak briefly featured, reminding us there are large numbers of planets and vast tracts of the galaxy where there isn't salient life as indigenous to it. And between these we encounter two planets that mix together the wilderness with human exploration, and Kofar is integral to this. This is a forest retreat planet where Kelnaka has disappeared, and as a Wookiee Jedi is seemingly tormented from the time 16 years earlier where he had been possessed by the Force witches and had to be sort of saved by Master Indara. And while seemingly a wilderness, there are traces of prior attempts to explore the forest planet of Kofar, and Kelnaka himself lives in a ruin, a part of a large exploration machine that has just been abandoned. So he's living amongst relics of an earlier time, and he is plagued by the spiral designs of the witch's art from the planet Brendok, and paints them on the walls. And this is never discussed, but it seems to be almost like rock art. It's not a symbol of an ancient culture here, but it is a transference to him of the indigenous beliefs in the thread of the coven witches. They have sort of infested his brain. They're tormenting him long after their demise. And I think that's a really interesting use of art in a ruined space that Kelnaka is still struggling with the legacy of his actions and those of his fellow Jedi. But it is to the planet of Brendok that we must go next, and this takes us back to two times. Firstly, 16 years earlier, where the four Jedi encounter the Force witches, and then to the present, where they go back to Brendok for the final showdown. So, filmed in Wales, Brendok is a landscape with ancient ruins, as depicted here. You have some kind of ruined tower on the left and some form of stone circle on the right, And this is never discussed, and we're left wondering, are these traces of an ancient past, perhaps a former presence of Dathomiri witches or the Force Coven's ancestors, or are these the remains of the settlements and landscapes that were destroyed by the hyperdrive disaster, the mining operation and other features, or a bit of both? It's left very unclear, but it gives that sense of antiquity and spirituality, as well as all of that being a part of indigeneity of local people before the chaos wrought by the hyperdrive disaster and then the destruction of the landscape. And again, in this aerial image, we see some kind of really complex set of avenues and stone circles that links to the series, the Ahsoka, where we see the Dathomiri are linked, or other Force witches, and we also see in the series Mandalorian the Force henge on Tython. This idea that the Jedi and other Force users are using stone circles as to mark and channel Force energy in some way. So again, this idea of stone circles coming very much from the prehistory of the British Isles, inspiring the architectures that somehow facilitate not simply way markers between long distance travel as to Peridia in Ahsoka, but here marking sort of the vergence of the Force. And in various scenes in that backstory, we encounter the Bunta tree and its environs and other places where the Jedi are camping, as framed by these relic wheels. We're not ever explained what these are. These are the relics of the hyperdrive disaster, of ancient architectures. It's left unclear. But the citadel of the fortress of the Brendok Coven is itself articulated as an ancient or an old mining operation that we see in daylight, at night time. We see at the lunar eclipse, and we also see it on fire when it's destroyed. And it's not just the presence of the fortress, but this vertical shaft which is framed by a large spiked sort of tri-faced structure, a kind of pyramid, or a kind of a pillar that has of unknown date. Was it put there recently by the witches? Seemingly not. It seems to be covered in vines. It's old. It's a part of some ancient sacred site that the witches are then tapping into on the heights of the citadel. So the citadel is reoccupied because seemingly it's proximal to this shaft, which operates as a conduit for the Force in some regard. Again, the details are not made clear. So relics of an ancient time are central to the indigeneity and spirituality of the Force witches and their life on Brendok. But then we encounter a different kind of archaeology, the ruins of the fortress post-destruction, encountered by Sol and others when they go back to Brendok, the site of the scene of the crime, so to speak, and the truths are revealed. So here, 16 years later, the same vertical shaft, the same pillar or obelisk, the same, but here in a much more relict and ruined state, having been abandoned following the devastation of the conflict between the witches and the Jedi. Now there are three further archaeological themes worthy of note and central to the storyline of the Acolyte. One is the continuation of the Star Wars interest in droids as things that are people, of the people-like things. The Pip droid is called Pip and is Osha's sort of sidekick, has its own personality, it's in conversation with Osha, and Mayho, when she takes it, she wipes its memory, she gives it a factory reset, she kills it and that individual personality when she takes the Pip droid. So it gives you that insight into a world where there are things that have people-like qualities. So I think it's important to recognise that as an ongoing dimension of the Star Wars universe. When do intelligent objects become people? And droids are we see in some series, such as the film Solo, we get a sense that droids are treated like animals that are made to entertain. We also see examples where they can be loyal sidekicks, as with R2-D2. The other, continuing a theme of the Star Wars interest in masks, and particularly the Sith who mask themselves, is the mask of the Stranger, the helmet of the Stranger, which is a really interesting design choice. It's shown broken and damaged. It's ancient, maybe. It is an heirloom of the Sith themselves, perhaps. But it's also not only concealing the identity of the individual wearer, but protecting them physically. It's made of a material that is resistant to energy weapons. But in addition to that, it is also giving a grim, death-like mask, very much akin to cadaver tombs from medieval cathedrals and churches, and brasses where a grinning skull, like one of the three figures of death or corpses that greet the three knights in the medieval parable. So there's that kind of medievalist theme, and this grinning, morbid theme of the death mask. It's a sensory deprivator. It's a protector, and it allows concentration on the Force. And in addition to all that, and as well as enhancing the use of the Force, it has that deathly grin. It's a very terrifying and sinister piece of material culture that's part of the person and extends the person's power. And in that regard, I think that's a really interesting choice of object. And the final observation is the choice of a heroic, overwater, Viking-style cremation for Master Sol. And yet the bittersweet nature of it, the uncanny nature of this is that this is not a funeral done in public to honour Master Sol. His body is being burnt to conceal his crimes and to maintain the integrity and the reputation of the Jedi Order, whose function and relationship with the High Republic is under threat following the revelation that multiple Jedi Masters have been murdered by an assassin, and there are deep conflicts and bad behaviours of Master Sol and his fellow Jedi that were kept secret but to the Jedi Council. So cremation here in a fantasy context over water is an implausible but repeated trope to identify a spiritual death, a heroic death linked to the Prose Edda account of the death of Balder, the god who's accidentally killed by his blind brother Hod. But in this context, it's given a different connotation. Rather than being heroic and sorrowful, it's almost used as a tool of concealment of the crimes of the Jedi and their colonial behaviours. So one level is a spiritual release. It's a public display, but here there is only one witness, one instigator, and that's Venestra Rowe, who as a master working for the Jedi Council is concealing the incidents and blaming Sol for all that has happened on Brendok. So it's a really interesting use of cremation in a science fiction world that links to many other uses of open air cremation in the Star Wars universe that I've addressed in my blog and my other reflections, and in other sci-fi contexts. That we have a fascination with the exotic, the Eastern, as well as the ancient nature of open air cremation in a world where in Western societies we are cremating but not in the open air. So there's this familiarity and exotic dance or game or tension surrounding open air cremation, and here being used to give the promise of a spiritual honouring and respecting of the dead, but denying the truth as a cremation. Another theme of cremation in Western societies that was one of the key objections to the popularisation of cremation in the 19th century is the idea that cremation can be used to conceal. So, here's my concluding thoughts. There's actually quite a lot of archaeological themes in The Acolyte. There's the theme of the Jedi and the High Republic are colonial ambassadors who are trying to impose and control the galaxy, are put into on Brendok into conflict with an indigenous spirituality, the Force, which is Coven. We get to see the centre of the High Republic, the cityscape of the planet city of Coruscant. We see oriental and medieval landscapes of Ueda and Alega. We see ancient monuments critical to the storyline of Kofar and Brendok. We see a ruined Coven on Brendok as the site of the culmination of the story. So there's multiple temporalities played out through the architectures and ruins of Brendok. And then we see some specific artefacts that are interesting from an archaeological point of view. The relationship of people and things with Pip and the droid's relationship with Osha. The Stranger's Mask as a mechanism of protection and concealment and of sinister projection of a morbid dark spirituality. And finally, we have the cremation, the prominent example of a cremation of a lead character in the Star Wars universe. Yet again, we've seen cremation is the mode of choice for the Jedi, but here, rather than being a mode of honouring Master Sol, it is a strategy of giving him respect but concealing his crimes. So with all that in mind, I hope that's a bit of interest and shows you how an archaeologist might approach this kind of fictional universe and how we can then use these themes to educate about the real world past as well as to reveal the importance of archaeology in our society in its own right.
If you've enjoyed this Archaeo Death video, why not check out the Archaeo Death blog at howardwilliamsblog.wordpress.com.